Hello everyone, this is Shubham, and today this video is about the endocrinology. In endocrinology portion, today this video will be further about the adrenal glands and the more detailed information about the adrenal glands. If you look over the adrenal gland, this is present over the kidney. We have two kidneys, so we have two adrenal glands. These are also called as the suprarenal glands. Why? Because they are situated over the kidney or above the kidney. That's why we call it as the suprarenal glands, right? So for an example, uh, here we have the kidney, right? The bean-shaped structure. So this is our kidney over here, right? And above the kidney, we have the adrenal glands present over here. So that's why they are called as suprarenal glands. So these are the adrenal glands over here, right? Adrenal gland. So we have two adrenal glands present in our human body because we have the two kidneys, right? So they are situated just above the they're present just above the kidneys, right? That's why we are calling it as the suprarenal glands, right? Now further, adrenal glands have two parts, right? So adrenal gland can be divided into two parts, that is the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla, right? So adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Further, adrenal cortex also have three portions over there, right? Through which it secretes various kinds of important hormones in our human body, right? So what are these three parts? So the first one is, these are actually the zones. So the first zone is the zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa. Second one is the zona fasciculata. And third one is the zona reticularis. Zona reticularis. Right. So which zone of the adrenal cortex, right, secretes which kind of hormone and what is the function of that particular hormone, we have to discuss about this, right? So zona glomerulosa, it secretes, if we talk about the zona glomerulosa, it secretes the mineralocorticoids, right? Mineralocorticoids, and the examples of our mineralocorticoids are the aldosterone, right? So zona glomerulosa secreting the mineralocorticoids, right? So the aldosterone is the classical example of the mineralocorticoids. Likewise, zona fasciculata, they are secreting the glucocorticoids, right? For example, the cortisol. So zona glomerulosa, they are secreting the glucocorticoids, right? For example, the cortisol. And third one, the zona reticularis. Zona reticularis are secreting the androgens, right? Now, how they secrete in the blood? I mean, what stimulates these zones of the adrenal cortex, right, which is a part of the adrenal gland, what makes them to secrete in the blood, right? Because they are not secreting every time in the higher quantity in the blood, right? So the story begins with the brain, right, on the top. So for an example, if any person is having stress at any particular time, right? Likewise, in today's lifestyle, there is more stress in our lifestyle, right? So for example, any person is suffering from stress. So what happens over there? Because the glucocorticoids or cortisol, they are more prevalent in releasing, right? So the zona fasciculata, which are releasing the glucocorticoids, they are also called as the stress hormones. And zona reticularis, they are secreting the androgens, they are also called as the sex hormones, right? So what happens? For example, if a person is having stress, right? So stress will stimulate our hypothalamus inside the brain. So inside the brain we have the hypothalamus, right? Just below it we have the pituitary gland, right? So there is the hypothalamus. So the stress will stimulate the hypothalamus to release corticotropin releasing hormone, right? So now the hypothalamus will release the corticotropin releasing hormone. So for example, hypothalamus is releasing this hormone, right? Corticotropin releasing hormone. Now what will happen? This corticotropin releasing hormone will stimulate further the anterior pituitary gland, right? In the pituitary gland, if you revise about the endocrinology in the pituitary portion, so the corticotropin releasing hormone will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland, which is also called as the adenohypophysis, right? The other name of the pituitary gland is the hypophysis, right? In the pituitary gland, we have the two portions, that is the anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland, right? Anterior pituitary gland is also called as the adenohypophysis, and the posterior pituitary gland is also called as the neurohypophysis, right? We will talk about the hormones, that which hormones are secreted from the anterior pituitary gland and which hormones secreted from the posterior pituitary gland in any different video, but this video is more about the adrenal glands, right? So what happens whenever any person is suffering from stress? The stress will stimulate this hormone. The stress will stimulate actually the hypothalamus, right? Now the hypothalamus will release the corticotropin releasing hormone, right? Now this corticotropin releasing hormone will further stimulate the anterior pituitary gland, right? So this corticotropin releasing hormone will stimulate the anterior pituitary gland, which is also called as the adenohypophysis, right? So adenohypophysis, or you can call it as the anterior pituitary gland, right? Now what happens? This adenohypophysis will secrete one more hormone, that is the adenocorticotropic hormone, that is the ACTH. However, remember that adenohypophysis is very important part of the pituitary gland because it secretes many hormones. For an example, it also secretes the growth hormone, right? It also secretes the gonadotropes, for example, the luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormones, right? Irrespective of the person, whether the person is the male or female. In both the conditions, there is the release of the gonadotropes from the anterior pituitary gland, right? Gonadotropes examples are the LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. They are also releasing the thyroid stimulating hormone, right? TSH. They are also releasing the adrenocorticotropic hormone. But in this situation, what I'm going to focus on, that this adenohypophysis will release the adrenocorticotropic hormone. As the name suggests, the adrenocorticotrophy, right? It's gonna act on the adrenal gland, right? For example, we have the thyroid stimulating hormone. That thyroid stimulating hormone gonna act on the thyroid gland, right? So these names are suggesting that on which gland which hormones is gonna act. So for example, in this situation, adenohypophysis is releasing the adrenocorticotropic hormone, right? Because of the stress eventually. So adrenocorticotropic hormone will now go to the adrenal gland. And adrenal gland, as I've already discussed, that adrenal gland have two parts, the adrenal cortex as well as the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal cortex further have the three portions over there. So this ACTH, if it will stimulate, so for example, if this is stimulating this portion over here, right, zona glomerulosa, so the zona glomerulosa will secrete the mineralocorticoids, right? For example, the aldosterone. Now what the aldosterone does, that is the basic question. So if I will rub this portion over here, so aldosterone, what is it doing over there? Actually, aldosterone helps us in retaining the sodium as well as water inside our body. and increases the body fluid volume, right? For example, in case of hypotension, aldosterone can be helpful, right? Because in hypotension there is the decreased blood pressure, and in that situation we want the blood pressure increased. So the secretion of the aldosterone over in that situation can increase our body fluid volume, and further the body fluid volume can increase our blood pressure over there, right? So for example, there is the aldosterone, right? And now you know the aldosterone, from where is it coming? Aldosterone is actually secreting from the zona glomerulosa, right? So first of all, if you will draw the basic diagram of the adrenal cortex over here, for example, this is the adrenal cortex, right? Between it, this is the medulla, right? This is the adrenal medulla over here, right? And this portion over here, this is the adrenal cortex. Now adrenal cortex further have zones, right? Adrenal cortex further have zones, right? These three zones over here, for example, this zone, right? This zone is called as the zona glomerulosa. Zona glomerulosa. This zone is also called as the zona fasciculata. And further, this zone is called as the zona reticularis, right? So you can memorize these zones with the mnemonic GFR. Zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis, right? GFR, now you must be thinking that GFR, we have studied it somewhere else also. For example, in this kidneys, right? As far as kidneys are concerned, there is the GFR, and there we call it as the glomerular filtration rate, right? So here, for just remembering purpose, you can use this mnemonic, the GFR, for remembering the zones of the adrenal cortex over there, right? So if the adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary gland will stimulate the zona glomerulosa under stress situations, right, it will release the mineralocorticoids, aldosterone, right? Now what the aldosterone does, it acts on the kidneys, right? In the kidneys, we have the nephron, which is the structure and functional unit of the kidneys, right? In the nephrons, we have various kinds of part over there, right? For an example, we have the proximal convoluted tubules, we have the loop of Henle, we have the distal convoluted tubules, right? We have the collecting duct over there, but these are the last portions, right? So the aldosterone acts on the collecting duct as well as the distal convoluted tubules portion, right? So they act on DCT and the collecting duct portion of the nephron, right? And what they does over there, they causes the retention of sodium as well as water. So they are causing the retention of sodium as well as water, as well as they are causing the potassium excretion, the flushing out of potassium, right? Due to which in some situations, potassium excretion, right? Due to which in some conditions what happens, that due to the excretion of the potassium ions, there could be the situation of the hypokalemia in some patients, right? Because from the blood, potassium is going into the urine and is flushing out over there, right? So for example, if the person is having the potassium excretion, right, so that person can suffer from the hypokalemia also. So this is about the aldosterone, right? The next thing is, for example, this was the ACTH over here. That was actually the culprit of stimulating these kind of zones over here, right? Now, if the adrenocorticotropic hormone will stimulate the zona fasciculata, right, what will happen? So now it is stimulating this zone over here, the zona fasciculata. Now zona fasciculata, you must be remembering that zona fasciculata releases which kind of hormones? They're releasing the stress hormones, right? So for an example, the cortisol, right? These are the stress hormones over there. So what are they doing? They actually causes the hyperglycemic conditions, right? They can increase the osteoclastic activity, right? So they can induce the osteoporosis, which means that these persons can have higher chances of getting the bone fractures, because due to the osteoclastic activity stimulation, right, there is the digging of bones in those patients, right? Because we have the cells present in our bones, for example the osteoblast, osteocytes, and the osteoclast, right? So the osteoblasts are making up our bone, and the osteoclasts are destroying our bone regularly, right? So for example, if we talk about the parathormone, which is releases from the parathyroid gland, parathormone hormone, what is it doing? It is stimulating the osteoclastic activity, right, and digging up the bone over there, and releases and extract out the calcium from the bone and sending it into the blood, right? So when the parathormone hormone releases, because whenever the calcium concentration inside the blood is reduced, for example the hypocalcemic conditions, in those cases the parathormone releases from the parathyroid gland, right, and they stimulate the osteoclastic activity over there in the bones, right? However, this video is not about the parathyroid gland. This video is more about the adrenal gland, right? So I was saying that zona fasciculata, once it will be stimulated by the adrenocorticotrophic hormone under stressful conditions, under stressful situations, what will happen? The zona fasciculata will secrete the glucocorticoids over there, right? Cortisols. These are the stress hormones. So they can cause the hypertensive situations. For example, the increasing of the blood pressure, right? They can have the immunosuppression, right? So these persons can have reduced pain, right? In some situations, they can have if they are having the pain, they are helpful in reducing the pain, the glucocorticoids. But at the same time, these persons are more prone to the infections, right? So these persons have higher chances of getting the infections because of the immunosuppression function. Osteoclastic activity, increased osteoclastic activity, so these persons have more chances of getting the osteoporosis, right? More chances of getting the bone fractures. So these are some properties, right? Further, they can have fat deposition, right? So many patients are having the complaints of getting the weight gain, especially in the females, right? They're getting the weight on themselves, right? So the weight gain problem. Further, if we talk about the zona reticularis, so for example, if the ACTH is stimulating the zona reticularis, in that situation, they will release the sex hormones, right? For an example, the androgens, right? So in case of the males, that is the testosterone, right, which is mainly releasing from the gonads for example, in the testes in the males, right? And in case of females, in the ovary, estrogen, progesterone. These are the hormones, right? So now let's talk about the adrenal medulla. But before going into the details of the adrenal medulla and which kind of hormones it releases, I would like to talk about more about the sex hormones, right? In the females, it actually increases the libido. Now, what is libido? Libido is actually you can say the sex drive, right? So it can increase the libido in the females, as well as it can in the males. As far as males are concerned, it can increase the masculine characters in the male. For example, the hair growth, right? Broad shoulders, right? Changing of the voice in the males or the boys, as well as the increasing up of the secretion of the hormones, for example, the testosterone, right? Now, the adrenal medulla, how the adrenal medulla hormones are getting into the blood. Actually, the sympathetic nervous system is innervating in the adrenal medulla, right? So whenever the person is in a stressful condition, for example, right? For example, you are fighting with someone, or you want to run away from some situation, for an example, right? In that case, your sympathetic nervous system activates. And for example, if sympathetic nervous system is activating the adrenal medulla, in that case, your adrenal medulla will release some kind of special hormones, right? Commonly, we call them as the catecholamines. So the medulla, adrenal medulla, is releasing the catecholamines. Now catecholamines, what are these? Catecholamines have two kinds of hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? Adrenaline can also be called as the epinephrine, and noradrenaline can also be called as the norepinephrine, right? You must have heard about these hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline, right? Or epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? So these are the hormones released by the adrenal medulla, right? So this portion is the adrenal medulla, and these three layers are of the adrenal cortex, right? So this was the short video of the adrenal glands, right? So I hope you like this stuff. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos on the endocrinology.